What's going on, people? Jeffrey here, Jafar. Um, yeah, today I figured I was going to talk about usury, um, and not the religious definition of usury. I'm using a broader definition, and I define usury as any transaction where something material, something that exists, is finite, is going one way but not the other way in the transaction. So, um, you know, if I'm selling you a digital image that I can make infinite copies of, I'm not giving up anything. I'm not spending anything, right? But you are spending the $10 or whatever to use that image. So a transaction has occurred where I lost nothing, but you did lose something, right? And technically, you didn't even gain anything because of how copyright law works. Um, so that's basically what usury is, as the definition I'm using it. And something something of value, again, it is something which has value. So it is like a material thing that you have to store, you have to protect it, you have to, it's finite, right? Or your time, right? Because your time is limited. Once you die, you die. You have no more time. Um, if you spend an hour of your life doing something and you get $10 for it, you have lost an hour of your life that is gone. You can't get it back. Um, so it's something that has an actual cost, right? If you have a pizza and you sell two slices of pizza for $10, you've lost something. You've lost two slices of pizza, right? So those are not usurious transactions. But a usurious transaction would be, you loan out $1,000 and then you expect to be paid back 1,100. And I think that these kinds of transactions, when done on the scale that they are done in today's society, they lead to wealth inequality. I mean, that's where I would argue that's where wealth inequality comes from. That everything else that you could attribute as a cause to wealth inequality utterly pales in comparison. Um, so let's think about this, right? You have, let's say in the world you have 50 people, or let's keep it simple. Let's say you have 10 people, right? And let's say they each have $100. So there is $1,000 in the world to go around. Now let's say one guy, he wants to do something, but it costs more than $1,000. So he needs to get money from somebody else, right? So he has to borrow it. So he goes to some guy. He goes to the banker, let's say, and he's like, "Hey, banker, I need to borrow $500." And the banker's like, "All right, cool. You can borrow $500. Just pay me back $600." Right? That's the interest. And the guy's like, "All right, cool." So he gets $500 from the banker, and now he has 1,500, and the banker has 500, and everybody else has 1,000. So this guy, he spends his money to do his business, and in his business, he gets from people $1,000, let's say, right? So the 8 people who are left, they're all down $100, except two of them are down $200, right? Or one of them is down 300. However you want to divide it, right? And this guy, he he has his $1,000 that he earns from his business. He gives 600 to the banker. The banker now has 1,100 bucks. The guy at the business now has 400 bucks, and everybody else has 900 and 800, right? And now the banker, he does this again. Somebody else comes for a loan, right? They need 500 bucks. He loans it out on the condition that they pay back 600. And then this process repeats. And then it repeats, and then it repeats. And eventually the banker has, 3, 4, 5,000 bucks. And everybody else, the other 9 people, split among them is 500 bucks. Right? And the banker, he's going to take this money and invest it, expecting, of course, a higher payout. But he's not going to just spend it. He's not going to give it back to the other 9 people, right? He's just going to, keep trying to accumulate. Eventually, he's going to have all of the money, or most of the money, and everybody else is going to have nothing. And that's kind of an extreme example, right? Because, the transactions usually aren't that bold where you borrow 500 and pay back 600. But, it's the little ones, right? And they occur millions of times a year, right? Anytime somebody does anything that has to do with interest, paying back loans, doing all that, any transactions that involve patents or copyright or intellectual property or any of that stuff, all of it involves a situation where a person is not spending anything, but they're getting something. And what happens is, as these transactions continue to accrue, and X amount of time passes, you have a situation where all the wealth is pulled into the hands of a few. The few people who are doing those transactions and pioneering and really pushing those kinds of transactions. And to me, that's basically it, right? If you have a situation where people, are able to accumulate with the wealth of others at no cost, then they're going to accumulate, they're going to get all the wealth eventually. It doesn't matter how many people are in the system, how much wealth is in the system, because wealth is limited, right? Wealth is always limited. It doesn't matter what, intellectual property or copyrights or whatever the courts, none of that matters. Even the currency you have is not wealth. Wealth is the real, actual resources you have to do things, right? Because currency doesn't allow you to do things. Like, my bank account could have $50 billion, but I can't do anything with that. I have to spend it. And what am I spending it for? Resources, right? So it's not the money that is the resource. It is not the money that is the thing that matters. It is the resource, the thing I am buying with it. And eventually, especially through all the complicated shit they have going on now, eventually all the wealth is going to be in the hands of a few. Right? Because usury is allowed. It is something that is allowed. It is quite literally like theft, basically. Mashallah. Yeah, and I don't know what you would do. I don't think there's really any kind of way to solve this, right? You could say, tax the people who are doing it the most. But then it's like, well, then you're just giving a lot of money to the government. right? Like that's not. They're still accumulating. They're still taking money out of society that is not going back into society. Um, so you're kind of stuck. And this is one of the reasons why I'm pretty much against all forms of intellectual property, because it all involves. Hold on. Oh, I'm probably making all kinds of noise. My mic is messing up. There we go. Yeah, this causes all sorts of problems, right? Um, and it's one of the primary reasons. Like it's one of the wisdoms behind why usury is not permitted in Islam. Right? You can't sell gold for gold, right? Like if you want to exchange gold, it has to be the same amount of gold. Um, you can't cheat basically, right? Like you can't get something for nothing. Um, and like I said, even your time, right? Because like for example, you could have a situation where you want the common example given is like, oh well, what about artists and authors and blah blah blah. You could have a situation where you write a book and then you print a bunch of copies and then you sell those copies because that's a cost. But making a PDF and then duplicating that PDF infinitely at no cost and then getting $100 every time you quote sell one, you're just accumulating money at no cost. So yeah, like that, you're part of the problem. Even if you're not making millions of dollars, you're still part of the problem, right? An artist, they can paint on a canvas and then sell that canvas, or they could be commissioned, where it's like, hey, can you come in and paint, you know, this, right? And then they could charge by the hour. Like there's still ways they could make money. But if they're doing something digitally, and they do it once, and then they sell it an infinite number of times, or potentially an infinite number of times, at no cost, right? I mean, it costs them what? You know, let's say 8 hours to do some kind of thing, right? What is 8 hours, worth? Like if it's is it okay? Like, do you value it at $20 an hour? Right? Let's see. Oops. It's $160. So your painting is worth $160. Right? Let's say you worked on it 8 hours and you sold it for $160, right? So $20 an hour. But it's a digital painting, so you sold it 100 times. Whoops. Hold on. Go back. I'm using my calculator here because I am really bad at math. Times 100. No, times 100. 16,000. I probably should have been able to figure that out. So your painting that you spent 8 hours on is worth 16,000. Like, you spent 8 hours to do this piece. You deserve to pull 16,000 from society for it. Is that what we're saying? And I mean, that's still like that's tiny. Right? Take Amazon, right? A big thing about Amazon is that they have their logistics systems that they own that they're not things, they're ideas about how to do logistics, right? They're designs for different, apparatuses in the system that allows them to do the logistics the way that they do it. And they paid people to design those. The people who designed them got paid. Right? So Amazon spent money, and in return they got these designs. And now they continue to use these designs to, maybe this isn't the best example. Them preventing others from using those designs is how can I explain that? It's kind of like a form of usury, but it's kind of hard to explain. Yeah, I can't explain it right now. I have to actually think about that. But for sure, they'll have these designs, and then they might allow. Yeah, there we go. They would allow people to use them, right? Like some company, wants to, implement something. They use the designs. They pay Amazon some kind of a fee every year, or whatever, a license, right? So, let's say it cost Amazon $1,000 to come up with these designs. Amazon would then lease them out, charging, $1,000 a year, and 50 companies use them for 5 years. Amazon's pulling in a lot of money, right? For at no cost, basically. The cost is what Amazon is giving, rather, is a promise not to sue, right? Because even the designs themselves, they probably don't actually have to give, because you could probably find this stuff, right? And I'm talking in general, like I'm using Amazon as an example, but intellectual properties out there, you can find all this information usually, in different fields, right? What you're buying is a license, and what you're really buying when you do that is a promise from the copyright holder that they won't sue, right? So they're selling you a promise that they won't harm you, and in return you're giving up wealth. You're giving up some kind of wealth. Right? So this idea of shouldn't, they spend all the money, designing, blah, blah, blah. Shouldn't the people who did that get paid? Well, they did get paid, right? The designers did get paid. But their output became an intellectual property for someone else who's going to use it to make more money. To accumulate, more money. Right? And when you have a society where everybody's doing this is what all the companies are doing, then the money just is pooling into the hands of a few, right? And I think this is probably the greatest factor, the strongest factor in the equation when it comes to why there is such great wealth inequality in the world. I mean, the amount of wealth that these guys have generated in the last 20 years it's spiked. It's grown exponentially. The amount of wealth in the world has not grown exponentially. Rather, the accumulation of wealth in the hands of a few has grown exponentially. And the only way that a few people could have all of the actual wealth is if they were doing transactions where they didn't have to have anything to give, right? Because in a system where every transaction is equal, meaning a person is giving something and they're getting something, then there's a stabilization, right? There's a certain soft cap that anybody could reach, right? There's a soft cap on the amount of wealth that they could accumulate, because the more wealth that you have, the more you have to protect it, and so the more you have to spend, right? Like if your wealth is a lot of things, you have to put those things in a warehouse and you have to pay people. And then the more stuff you have in the warehouse, the more desirable it is for people to try to take it, so the more you have to pay for protection, right? If they're perishable things, then they're things that will destroy themselves over time. So there's plenty of ways to kind of cap the wealth that you can have. Um, there are still other ways that there could be inequalities in wealth, right? A guy who owns a gold mine is going to have a lot more wealth than a farmer who's you know on the rice paddy, right? But that gold miner has to spend a lot to protect his mine. He has to pay people. He has to protect the shipments. He has to find people willing to buy. Like there's a cost. There's a great cost, and the more, again, like I said, the more wealth that he has, the greater the cost. So there's like a soft plateau. There's a soft cap at how much wealth any person can have. Um, yeah, ma sha Allahu kan wa ma lam yasha lam yakun. There it is, folks. I mean, I'm sure somebody can come along and be like, well, actually, blah, 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 but to me, this is the basis of wealth inequality. You have transactions that are occurring where one side is spending something real and the other side isn't. And when you have a lot of these, millions at this point per year, per day, then the wealth is going to pool into the hands of a few. Also, the advent of fiat currency and digital currency, when I say digital, I don't mean like cryptocurrency. I mean, like the stuff in your bank, right? The bank doesn't have just a pile of money sitting around. It's all digits in a computer system. All of that has only worked to increase the amount of wealth inequality and just the amount of how big the numbers can get, right? The numbers are so big because a lot of that is, Jeff Bezos has how much money he has. A lot of that is speculation on how much his assets are worth and just, the numbers that are pumped into his bank account, right? That's not, actual wealth. In terms of actual wealth, these billionaires and, eventual trillionaires are probably not that far up, right? Like, if I had $10 million, I'd probably still have the same healthcare and standard of living as Jeff Bezos, right? And that 10 million would still be overkill, right? Like it's not. He doesn't have more because he has a bigger number. That's something to also keep in mind, right? So there is wealth inequality, and it is due to usury, basically. But also, a lot of the wealth, quote unquote, is it's not real wealth, right? Like having 500 billion or whatever in your bank account, that's not wealth. That's you have literally a number. In order to do anything in the world, you have to spend that number because that number is it's an intermediary thing, right? It's not the number itself that you use to build an empire. It's the materials you buy using those numbers to build the empire. MashaAllah can. You know what? It's been 24 minutes. I wanted to say I just woke up, so that's why this has been a more, I guess, somber sounding, I guess boring could be another word, sounding podcast. I'm also trying to be a little quieter because I got people here, and I don't want to interrupt them. I don't want them to interrupt me. So, anyways, yeah, that's been my little rant thingy on wealth and usury. I don't know how you could fix it. You would need total societal collapse, right? Because the reason that it's the reason that this system is allowed to continue to exist is because there are governments that back the transactions that involve usury, right? Because if there was no government, eventually people would just, they'd say, fuck it. Like, I'm not doing this. It's because there are governments that enforce those contracts. Right? You can't have copyright without a government, right? If there's no government, then it's like, I mean, who cares? Like, you're not going to be able to do anything. You can't stop me. I mean, unless, you want to get violent, and then it just becomes like, a bunch of warlords, right? But like, it's the government that enables the copyright law to stand, right? Because it's not a thing. It's not an enforceable thing. Like, it's not real, right? You literally cannot stop me from using an idea. You can, react to me using it by trying to attack me or sue me or whatever, but like, you can't stop me. Like, that's not how this works. So, and because governments are probably not going to change anytime soon, especially like when it comes to usury and copyright law, then there's basically not much you can do, right? Like, you would need a catastrophic, you know, fallout level event, post-apocalypse type of situation, where everything's just, done, right? And then we go back to, an actual system, a barter system. And it's kind of interesting, as a little note, people kind of critique the barter system, but it's like, if I have a gold coin that weighs, a quarter of a pound, that's like, so the idea with a barter system is that people are, they talk about, oh, well, having to lug gold around or lug coins around. It's like, dude, a gold coin that's like the size of a $50, that's worth a lot. Like, you could split that in half and, buy a cheap house. Maybe not in this market, but 20 years ago, right? But again, if there was no fiat currency, there would be no inflation and all that other jazz. Anyways, things would be a lot cheaper, right? And it's not that inconvenient. Like, people did this for thousands of years. Like, it wouldn't be a thing, right? Having a barter system, or a system where you use actual metals, gold, silver, etc., would not be that, difficult. But anyways, that's a little side tangent. Anyways, I'm gonna end the video here. Usury, yeah, is that what we're gonna call this episode? Let's talk number 8, usury. Yeah, actually, let's see. Intellectual property and wealth inequality. Oh man, that is a large. Hold on, let's zoom out. Oop. What do I normally set this at? 120? Is that it? Oop, 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 oop. No, that is not it. There we go, that's about good. 70, I think 70 is where I usually put it. Oh wow, my keyboard is just... I have a wireless keyboard and sometimes it doesn't register. Property, intellectual property, and wealth inequality. Alright, that does not look right. Let's... Can I get you on the next line? Yes, I can. Alright. Now let's... That looks good. Boom, bam. Let's select all of the text. Go to the next layer. Select. Grow selection. Paint fill. Bam. There we go. Let's talk number 8. Intellectual property and wealth inequality. Anyways, that's been Jafar. That's been me. Let you guys go now. Talk to you later. And stop recording.